where is this inequality? How do we quantify it? So what we have done here is to look at the Delhi population through a class lens where the richest are at the top and the poorest 10% of the population at the bottom. And as you can see in fuel and electricity, which is an unequal consumption pattern that you have here, where the richest 10% of the population actually consume almost 6 times of what the poorest section of the population consumes. And this share in transport is starker, as I say, as you can see, which is like a funnel, where the poorest, between the poorest and the richest, it's almost 30 to 35 times difference between the consumption share of the richest in Delhi and the poorest in Delhi. And it's not surprising, as a result of which, that you have the emissions coming out of the richest Delhiites is about 27%. So the top 10% contributes to almost 3 times as much to carbon as and whereas the poorest, the 10%, contributes only 3%, which again is almost 9 times the difference between the richest and the poorest. Even though carbon emission is something which is a larger problem, a much bigger problem, but unfortunately that doesn't foreground the discussions here. It's essentially pollution, which is more localized. But if we again do a class analysis just as we did of emissions, what we get is very stark. Again, a funnel where the high income, which is the top 40% of the population, contributes to 2/3 of the AQI, if we were to put it like that. And the bottom 20% of the population only contributes 7% of that pollution. Who suffers? And that's where the inequality, George Monbiot said, a leading environmentalist, that the problem of climate change is that those who contribute the least bear the brunt of it the most. Deaths from asthma, which is one of the respiratory diseases coming out as a result of exposure to pollution, and the high income, again the same categorization that I did in the last slide, that it's the bottom which actually bears the burden of it. So I think in terms of policy, you need to invert this pyramid of suffering. And the only way it can be done is if we forefront the policy through the lens of class, which is to change the energy mix of the city. One of which was in terms of, changing, let's say, the public transport from a diesel-based, system to a CNG-based system. You can actually impose a carbon tax. In response to that, therefore, we propose that a part of the revenue, what can be called a carbon tax, which is returned in the form of a dividend, except that here we are talking in terms of a dividend in kind. As a result of this redistributive policy, despite a tax, is that you see the bottom, this is the poorest section of the population and this is the richest. And as you can see that the benefits that the poorest section of the population get as a result of this policy is more than compensated. The benefit that more than compensates the tax that they would have to pay. So this is the carbon charge that they would have to pay. And this is the benefit that they get as a result of this policy. And in net, there is a net benefit that the poorer section. So in that sense, you are inverting that pyramid. And the richest actually end up paying for it. The last bit is about how do you finance it. And as I said, financing essentially comes from the taxes that are levied on commodities which are essentially consumed in large quantities by the richest sections of the population. This has all the details of how this fund can be managed, and it's a revenue neutral policy. So there is no cost on the exchequer at all.